be very gullible when it comes to mainstream media or government sources. Have you ever noticed that a lot of people seem to acknowledge that corruption is everywhere and the government is stupid and we can't trust them, yet at the same time, they can't seem to question anything that officialdom tells them? Well, there's a really good reason why. We're not just dealing with idiotic people. Today, we're going to continue with our series about election fraud by getting into the very deep aspect of how this lie machine actually works. Welcome, everybody. I'm Justin from Stillness in the Storm. If you haven't already done so, go to stillnessinthestorm.com/donate. There's also a link in the description. You can help support our work. We really need your help. We're getting censored and shadow banned all over the place. Hit the like button and subscribe, and let us know what you think in the comments. Let's move on to the most important part of this presentation, the psychology that proves how the lie machine works to deceive us. The people who came up with and maintain this lie machine did extensive studies into how the human mind works, most notably various CIA programs during the Cold War. In 1981, CIA Director William Casey said during the first meeting of President Ronald Reagan's cabinet that, quote, "We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false." How is it that people come to believe a lie of grand proportions? How do you deceive people using a coordinated propaganda effort? As we outlined before, this is not the work of a few radicals with no support. The lie machine is a symphony of hand-in-glove agents with corrupt actors in government, the mainstream media, social media, the justice system, universities and academic institutions, and lastly, the deceived people themselves. All of these pieces work together to produce an extremely powerful tool of social influence and mass mind deception. To prove to you that this isn't just some conspiracy theory, look at this video showing local news outlets repeating the same script verbatim.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
The El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about troubling and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Operation Mockingbird is an essential part of this history that we need to understand. This CIA program employed dozens of journalists as intelligence assets. The program was designed to manipulate public opinion. The above-board excuse for this program was justified as a necessary part of the Cold War. But in 1974, it was discovered, after the Watergate hearings, in a story first published by the New York Times, believe it or not, that the CIA's efforts to use propaganda against foreign threats had come home. As Frank Church, a senator on the Senate Intelligence Committee, put it when he spoke to the press as the story broke. Listen to Senator Church address the press when discussing these shocking revelations.
I thought that it was a matter of real concern that planted stories intended to serve a national purpose abroad came home and were circulated here and believed here, because this would mean that the CIA could manipulate the news in the United States by channeling it through some foreign country. Now, we're looking at that very carefully.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, the ships had been established, and I was told about them and asked if I'd carry on with them.
We have quite a lot of detailed information, and we will evaluate it, and we will include any evidence of wrongdoing or any evidence of impropriety in our final report.
What this should prove to you is that the government has been actively involved in using media-coordinated propaganda for decades. Operation Mockingbird showed the world that the media is just one part of an industrial-grade deception machine with the free-thinking people of the world as their primary target. Another CIA program known as MKUltra was also used to support the control system tactics developed for how to influence the thinking and opinions of people. Now, before we continue, let's talk about the dangers of 5G and toxic EMFs. Dr. Sanjay Gupta is one of many researchers that have been telling the world about the dangers of modern technology like cell phones and wireless devices. Dr. Gupta even appeared on CNN, of all places, talking about this damaging radiation. The same electromagnetic frequencies that the cells of our bodies use to communicate are used by wireless technology. It's like somebody screaming obscenities with a bullhorn when you and another person are trying to have a conversation. Clearly, you can't communicate with each other. This disruptive EMF radiation prevents your body's systems from working together, causing all sorts of diseases and problems like fatigue, headaches, accelerated aging, and immune system issues. Big tech has failed us with these irresponsible technologies. Now, you're going to want to protect yourself. I use a protection device developed by EMF Harmonize that is based on Tesla science, not only to reduce radiation exposure, but to transform it into something healthy. It sticks right on your cell phone, right over the antenna right here, and it helps transform this toxic EMF energy into something that's healthy and actually protects you. It's pretty awesome. I use it all the time. I got one on my laptop. You can use them in all sorts of different places. And they have a bracelet coming out soon. Go to stillnessinthestorm.com/EMF harmonized to learn more and stop the toxic influence of cell phones and Wi-Fi on your health. What you're about to learn will make you question everything you've ever heard from any so-called expert, be it in the realm of politics or science. The psychology that makes the mass lie machine possible is as follows. First, let's explore something that's been studied by psychologists and the advertising industry for a long time. It's called the illusory truth effect, also known as the reiteration effect or illusion of truth effect. It's the tendency to believe false information that's presented as true due to repeated exposure. For instance, if I tell you with an authoritative voice and phraseology that there's a second moon above the Earth, the more frequently you hear it across a span of time, especially if it comes from different seemingly credible sources, the more you'll begin to believe it. The reason why this works is what we're going to break down for you point for point. One of the first studies on this topic was done in 1977 at Villanova University and Temple University, where participants were asked to rate a series of trivia statements as true or false. Participants were exposed to these statements 3 times, with approximately 3 weeks between each exposure. The more a statement was repeated, the more it was rated as being truthful by the participants, rising from a 4.2 to a 4.7 in the system used to measure the effect. Research has concluded that, in general, people assess truth based on A, how well it agrees with things they think are already true, and B, how familiar it is. It's that last one that really counts for this effect. Essentially what this effect does is it works through repetition. The way it works is if you don't have a thought out reason for why something is true or not, then repeated exposure makes you familiar with the idea presented in a statement. This familiarity is misleading because it triggers your memory and makes it feel true merely because you're familiar with it. The sensation of memory recall itself will make things feel true. It's the feeling that helps mislead. But this only works if you can't assess the statement using thought or critical thinking. Keep that in mind. Thus, this is an emotion-based manipulation technique, the same kind used by advertisers that sell you on a feeling. Think about for a moment, how many people are out there trying to get you to ignore the facts and only focus on your feelings? Part of the reason why is that your feelings can be manipulated. And if you're not thinking about what you're feeling, then if you're not careful, you'll be misled. Now, critical thinking can override the feeling influence of familiarity. For instance, if you saw a statement that said 2 + 2 = 5, you could do the math yourself to know it wasn't true. The answer is clearly not 5, it's 4. The second aspect of this lie machine is social influence through a seemingly authoritative source. So how does this credibility come in? Well, the media triggers this sense of credibility because as media consumers, we've been trained to think that media outlets check their work before broadcasting something to the public. Thus, if you already believe that PBS, CNN, or other news outlets have told you something that's true, there's a pre-existing bias in your mind that they can use later to deceive you. That's why it's important for a propaganda outlet to tell the truth. Most of the time, you'll unthinkingly accept a lie that's slipped in later. For instance, if I were a reporter with PBS and I showed you the math equation 2x = 7x, you might think to yourself, well, it must be true. Surely they checked their math. In this case, you'd be wrong. 2x can't equal 7x. We won't go over the math though. The point is that because a statement comes from someone you believe is a credible source, it has social influencing power. As we'll discuss a bit later, as social creatures, we're more inclined to assume authoritative statements from someone seemingly credible are true because we want to feel included in the in-group. We want to fit in. Of course, if the source of a statement is believed by you to not be credible, like a fake news media outlet, it doesn't matter how authoritative it sounds. Your bias that they're fake news overrides the authoritative influence, producing the reverse effect, which in this case is the assumption of falsehood instead of truth. So instead of believing it, you reject it. But in both situations, it's a bias of prejudice. You're presented information, and if you have a bias that says that source can't be believed, then you won't look at it. So it can work in both directions. And that's why you got to be careful about feeling-based bias. You got to do more than just rely on your gut. You actually got to think, because sometimes people who lie tell the truth, and sometimes people who tell the truth lie or make mistakes. So here's an example of this. People who know about fake news outlets like CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post, etc., they tend to assume that information coming from these sources is false. But again, you got to be careful here. You want to avoid conceptual prejudice. You don't want to just unthinkingly reject information or accept it. You want to think about it each time, case by case. Third aspect in this mechanism of mass manipulation is multiple sources, a chorus of voices saying the same thing in an authoritative way. Go ahead and look at that video again that we watched a moment ago.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think.
We are the Borg. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
The same authoritative statement came from multiple sources that seem credible, like CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post, Politico, the New York Times. Although I don't think these sources are credible, but people have been trained to think they're credible. The repetition reinforces the assumption of truth effect. All these authoritative voices send a subconscious message to your social midbrain, that's the part right here, that says, this is what everyone else believes to be true, and I better accept it or I'll be left out. Like all social creatures, humans need each other to survive. We have ancient and very powerful neurological centers in the midbrain that motivate us to fit in with a social group. These are the same systems that work in mob settings, making it very easy to get people to do things they otherwise wouldn't do, like, let's say, storm the Capitol building on January 6th because agent provocateurs like John Sullivan tell them it's a good idea. This social influencing power uses feelings and emotions to lead you on. It's a kind of hypnotic suggestion. But again, the power of critical thinking can inhibit or act as a stopping mechanism to prevent suggestion from influencing you. Effective frequency is a well-known method used in the advertising industry to convince people to buy products. It's the marketing version of the illusory truth effect. Lisa Fazio, a psychology professor at Vanderbilt University, says this effect, quote, gives it the weight of a gut feeling. It's the hijacking of our gut feeling truth detecting system. And the way they do this is by using the social influencing power of the midbrain that we've been talking about. Ajay Kalra, a marketing professor at Rice's Jones Graduate School of Business, says that, quote, in general, human beings, after hearing any claim, look for information that confirms the initial conjecture. When you first hear a suggestion that seems true to you and it bypasses that critical thinking part of your brain, now your midbrain, like a filter, is looking for ways to reinforce that belief. And there's a really good reason why, because our beliefs at a very deep psychological level help us manage the chaos of the unknown and the environments around us. And so your beliefs literally help stabilize your sense of reality. There's a system built into us in almost all creatures that is taking things that we tend to believe that are true, what are called models of reality, and they create reinforcement programs that are constantly designed to look for new things and be like, yep, my beliefs are true. Yep, my beliefs are true. Yep, my beliefs are true. So this process happens unconsciously. It's like a background process. That's why you have to think. You use critical thinking to unpack and really dive into this, because if you're not careful, you'll spend 20 years believing something that was total BS. You get somebody to believe something that they think is true, and then it's going to create this reinforcing system, and they've created a whole false reality for themselves, and it'll self-reinforce. This is something I talked about in my series on Into the Storm on edgeofwonder.tv. So when you combine effective frequency with repetition from authoritative sources, an almost overwhelming desire to believe an authoritative statement kicks in. And because it's a feeling instead of a logical process, your gut tricks you into thinking it's true, sometimes making you think it's some kind of mystical truth detecting ability. This is another thing we have to be careful about, because effectively what we're talking about is a system of deception that was designed to hijack your emotions. And a lot of people rely on their emotions to tell them what is real. How many decisions do you make that are based on feeling alone? There's tons of them. It's not that these things are bad and we should just try to avoid them completely. But what we need to do is we need to use thinking, and we need to think to make sure, because if it's true, if it's really true, it should not just be true in our heart and our gut. It should be true in the mind. We were given a mind by the Creator for a reason. We have to use it. In summary, these three factors, repetition, authoritative statements from credible sources, and social influence, all work together to convince you something is true, all without you having to expend a single calorie of critical thinking power. I call this the social influence or groupthink transference of belief effect. It's the tendency for people to mindlessly believe things merely because seemingly everyone believes it or it feels good. This might be one of the most powerful things to understand in the modern age, because social media uses this effect all the time to get people to believe things without actually knowing they are true or false. And again, this is an ancient system. Religions and various other types of groups have been using social influence as a way to get people to believe things for a very long time. When you look at posts on social media or comments on YouTube, what you're basically doing is you're looking to see if it's believable based on other people's responses. You're trying to get a sense, what does the crowd believe? And most people, this is what a lot of people do. They look at the comments, they look at how many likes a post has, they look at all these social indicators to see if something is true or not. But popularity is no indication of truth. So how do you really know? Well, to really know something is true or false, what we today call fact checking or discernment, you need to use, as I've been saying, critical thinking. You need to assess the statement or claim, analyze the evidence used to support it, using logic and reason to determine if the claim actually describes the evidence correctly. Having said all of that, we're going to get to the part that probably matters the most, which is the solutions part. What are we actually going to do about this? So how do you actually use critical thinking to combat this lie machine? There are 4 key elements. First, we have a claim or statement about something you think might be true or false. Then we have the evidence to use to support that claim. And then the analysis of how the claim matches up with the evidence using a logical process. Now, the 4th step is you, that you actually take the time to become your own investigator using critical thinking. Let's look at an example. If I tell you there are 4 apples in a shopping bag on my kitchen table, then this statement is the claim part. The shopping bag on the table is the evidence I use to support my claim. Here you have to open the bag and look yourself, which is your personal investigation. Remember, you'll naturally be led to believe me if I seem like a trustworthy source. Well, another thing is, as social creatures, we generally want to avoid confronting each other about what we say is true. If you're my friend and it's my house and I have a history of telling the truth, then your past experience of my credibility will naturally lead you to believe me, especially because of social influencing power. Here we can understand this because if you question me, what's going to happen? It will make you uncomfortable. It's going to make me uncomfortable because it's a general assumption in social situations that you can't question people, that you have to accept what they're saying. And if you don't, then you're going to make them uncomfortable. Then you're going to feel like an outcast. It's going to create a lot of very intense negative emotions of anxiety, and people don't like feeling uncomfortable. So what we tend to do is we blindly believe what other people say in social situations, even if we haven't fact-checked them. As a matter of fact, that happens almost all the time. Let's use a discernment process to fact-check my statement that there are 4 apples in a shopping bag on my kitchen table. You go over to the table, open the bag to discover that there's only 3 apples in the shopping bag. What you've just done is gathered your own evidence using investigation. Now comes the analysis part. You take the claim, which is a description about reality, and compare it to reality itself. In this case, the claim that there are 4 apples doesn't match the evidence of the 3 apples you just discovered during your investigation by looking in the shopping bag. So what makes a true claim? Well, a true claim matches reality, and this is true for all claims of truth. So anytime anybody makes a statement, a claim, you read something in an article, anything that we call a fact is itself a claim of truth that you can use fact-checking for. The logic of discernment says that the claim has to match evidence collected in reality. If it doesn't match, it doesn't describe reality correctly. This means the claim isn't true, or it's only partially true. Here, my statement about there being 4 apples in a bag on my kitchen table is disproven because you dared to think critically and did your own investigation. Now, it's important to note that not all discernment is as easily done as the example we just went through, but the same basic principles are at work. The big thing to remember when using critical thinking is that your attempts to discern and fact check don't usually produce black and white answers. This means we have to develop the ability to entertain multiple possible answers within our knowledge base and thinking. Instead of trying to prove or disprove something right away, allow yourself to entertain each possibility and build up evidence for each one. Then as you gain more knowledge via investigation, these explored possibilities will naturally expand and clarify the question about what is actually true. And this guides us as time goes on. This is the strategy of contingency planning and systems analysis we discussed in previous videos. The same one the military uses to prepare for unknown situations. What I just described is something that's very well established. The pros, the pro fact checkers, the people that have been trained to critically think, because the bottom line is anybody can be trained to critically think. They don't just try to look for a black and white answer. When you're looking for a black and white answer, all you're really trying to do is reinforce your own beliefs. What you need to do is you need to get okay with multiple possibilities. And it'll take some time to do it, but once you do that, then it's going to be very liberating, because when you finally do that, you would develop a very dynamic and living truth detecting process. And your ability to not only accumulate greater information and knowledge enhances, also when you find out something isn't true, your world doesn't fall apart. You just realize, oh, I made a mistake. I'm just going to fix the situation, readjust my beliefs and what I think is true, and I'm moving forward. I'm good. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, and this might be one of the most important parts, is that we don't need to be unkind when we question others about their beliefs. Remember, when you get questioned and when you question other people, it triggers these social alarm systems in our brain, and that can make us feel very uncomfortable. So you want to be tactful and diplomatic as much as humanly possible. Ultimately, we want to create alliances with people so where we all can work together to try to find out the truth together. We're not trying to make enemies just by questioning people. If we're tactful and we use kindness to question the people around us, especially our friend and family circles, we can identify falsehoods without alienating people. Remember that divide and conquer is not our strategy. Let's dig further into why people blindly believe false things that come from social sources. Or widely accepted beliefs is another term for social sources. In other words, if you think everybody else believes it, you better believe there's some type of social influencing dynamic that's happening in your brain. As social creatures, the actual truth isn't as important as social truth or socially accepted facts. That is, what we believe to be true has more of an effect on our life than the actual truth. A good example of this are rumors and gossip. For example, someone who falsely accuses their manager of sexually assaulting them might convince all their coworkers that this happened, even though it didn't. And out of fear of upsetting their employees, the owner of the company might fire their manager even if it's not true. This happens all the time. Have you ever heard of the Me Too movement before? This is just one example of how powerful social beliefs can be, even though most aren't perfectly true. Now, the other thing to be careful of is just because it's coming from a social source, or you can't prove that it's true, doesn't mean it is automatically untrue. And this is where, to use the whole Me Too thing, this is where it can get really dicey. Because in a lot of situations, like I was saying earlier, there's not clear black and white answers. And a lot of situations, like the vast majority of situations, especially when we're dealing with historical events, you don't necessarily know what the truth is. You have to try to be strategic. You have to just build up as much evidence as possible. And you have to be diplomatic when you're dealing with, contentious situations like somebody accusing another person of sexual assault. You don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but you also don't want to disregard somebody's valid testimony. What you want to do is you want to investigate. You're like, okay, well, we're not going to jump to any conclusions. We're going to take what you said. We're going to investigate. We're going to use the innocent till proven guilty principle, which is a facet of the rule of law. And we're going to see what's really going on. Another example is the justification that the Columbia University article, The Politics of Voter Fraud, made earlier. Recall that they argued it was hard to believe that law enforcement completely missed the fact election fraud was happening. And therefore, since they couldn't believe it, the professor asserted the claim of widespread election fraud must be false. In essence, the professor was saying that because there was no social proof for the claim, it wasn't true. And of course, that's not right. Do you see how powerful social truth or socially accepted facts can be? A supposed college-educated researcher completely ignored reality, the actual truth, in favor of socially accepted facts that are themselves dead wrong. Another aspect of psychology we need to understand is that the brain circuits that reward us emotionally for belonging to a group are based on mutual beliefs and values. If you share a common belief or opinion, then you share an identity, and this makes you feel included. This is a psychology of identity politics and in-group preference. It's the reason why advertisers use scenes of people in groups enjoying a product they want you to buy, because you don't want to miss out. The FOMO effect, or fear of missing out, is triggered. If you were told that a lot of people believe something to be true, your ancient midbrain will lead you to accept that it is true because being included in the group means survival and access to things you enjoy, like friendship, sex, and business relations. The same psychology is at work in groupthink dynamics and mob situations. You're so driven to go along with the crowd that an almost overwhelming urge to accept a social trend pushes you forward at a deep subconscious level. Think about the fashion industry. It's another great example. Why do people buy the clothes they want? Do they have like a carefully thought out logical case? No, it's almost all feeling based. And these feelings that we use to make a lot of decisions, especially when it comes to purchases, can be manipulated by advertising and these social influencing mechanisms that we've been talking about. Now, what's even more interesting is that your brain will manufacture images, thoughts, and feelings that cause you to justify a socially reinforced belief. This is one of the reasons hypnotic regression can be dangerous if not done carefully, because the awesome computing power of the subconscious mind can create false realities that seem very real. Again, critical thinking here helps. The only way to override this instinctual urge produced by social influence is through inhibitory systems in the brain, which are toward the frontal lobe or neocortex. That's the part of the brain that makes you human instead of animal. It's the same part of the brain that suppresses an urge to go to the bathroom during a meeting at work. It requires conscious choice. It's the thinking part of the brain. Are you starting to see where this is going? In other words, if you don't apply critical thinking, it's very easy for the illusory truth effect to influence you. Through the social influencing effect, when a supposed study produces a paper that the media reports on, your social midbrain gets triggered, creating an almost overwhelming urge to accept what the media tells you. This is the power of mass media influence. Your brain is basically telling you that A, the belief pushed by the media is what everyone else believes, because the media represents the masses, and B, that if you don't accept it, even if you lack evidence to fact check it yourself, you'll be an outcast, which makes you feel as though your survival is being threatened. When your survival instincts are triggered, some of the most ancient and powerful brain systems come online. These systems are the ones the CIA studied in their efforts to industrialize mass mind influence. And what's frightening is that it worked. We're living in the world that has been shaped and molded by techniques developed decades ago. This is why fake news media is so dangerous. The people who own and operate the media know exactly what they're doing. They know that they can use corrupt law enforcement, fake experts and research groups, and the media apparatus to produce a very convincing lie. Now, before we talk about how to combat this, here's the formula they use. Understanding this helps us form defenses that keep our mind from being hijacked. It works like this. 1. A statement is presented as if it were true from an authoritative source like an expert, research group, or influencer. 2. The statement is echoed by multiple sources, such as news agencies, people in everyday life, or social media posts. 3. If you don't have any experience or evidence in hand to fact check the statement yourself, you'll feel an urge to believe it. 4. Once you accept it, your subconscious mind will manufacture reasons to reinforce the belief. And 5, the effect only works when you don't inhibit the belief via critical thinking. Now that you know how the industry of manufactured consent works, you can build up a healthy intellectual immune system. Knowledge is power. As I like to say, disinformation is key information to a well-trained mind. To defend yourself against social influencing used to push false beliefs, you need critical thinking that produces discernment. You become the master of your beliefs instead of hidden forces you can't trust controlling what you believe. When you think critically, you invoke doubt and healthy skepticism. This requires asking yourself simple questions, like why is this true? What's the evidence? When you do this, the social midbrain system gets inhibited by the bravery centers of the brain in the xiphoid nucleus, activating the higher thinking part in the neocortex. It's the same part of your brain that activates when you're having a fight response in relation to a fearful stimulus. And it's these same centers that become active during spiritual experiences. Critical thinking takes the information that's in the social midbrain and transfers it up into the neocortex, where meaning and critical thinking takes place. This is where the discernment skills we talked about earlier come online. Of course, if you don't know how to think critically, which most of us don't because this was stripped out of the education system decades ago, we won't even try to discern something ourselves. But the good news is that A, there's a lot of great information to learn how to discern correctly, which we're going to cover on this channel. And B, the more you practice, the better you get. What's also interesting about the mass media social influencing system used to make people believe false things is that it's often coming through a video screen on your TV, phone, or computer. It's been well known for decades that watching TV for only a few minutes lowers your brain waves from beta to alpha. Beta is where most of the thinking happens. Alpha is a deeply relaxed, highly absorbent state.
The longer a person watches television, the more easily the brain slips into alpha level, a slow, steady brainwave pattern in which the mind is in its most receptive mode. Images and suggestions are implanted directly into the mind without viewer participation. An effective hypnosis is induced, and the viewer surrenders to the unending television image stream.
One last thing to consider to really prove to you just how well these deceivers have perfected their weapons of mass deception is the power of the color blue. Ever notice that the color blue is used in a lot of mainstream media programs? Psychologists have known for a long time that the color blue produces a calming and relaxing effect. It's also been proven to help reduce crime when used in streetlights. This is because blue triggers relaxing and compliant brain states. In closing, this knowledge helps us understand not only how the mass media lie machine works, but also what we can do to stop it. We need to use critical thinking to discern if something is true or false. The key is to really know by becoming an expert in your own right via investigation and analysis. As we revealed, your gut feelings can deceive you. The experts might lie to you, or they might have missed something. But if you learn how to think critically and practice discernment using claim identification, evidence gathering, and analysis via logic and reason, you can become a master fact checker yourself. And most importantly, we don't have to do this alone. We need to work together to pool our minds and resources so each of us uses the thinking power of our fellows to enhance our own understanding. This is something I've been extremely passionate about for years, ever since I discovered everything I've shown you in this video. Now, to be clear, I'm not asking you to accept everything I've told you. Don't just believe me. Fact check me too. I'm not perfect. I might have made a mistake, and I'm relying on all of you to help me with my blind spots. Let me know what you think in the comments. We need to rediscover the power of a forum, which was the method ancient Greeks and great thinkers used, such as dialectic and rhetoric, to share ideas in a group setting. The greatest minds of history used discourse and discussion to sift out the truth with their fellows. Two minds are greater than one. One mind with critical thinking can accomplish a lot, but a bunch of minds using critical thinking can do miraculous things. I'm reminded of Matthew 10:34, where it is said, quote, "I come not to send peace, but a sword." Blindly accepting a belief from a popular source makes us feel false peace, but the real peace of the soul needs the truth, which we only can claim for ourselves. This means using bravery so we can dare to question things we hear from the media and our fellows. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and share it with your friends. We need your support to keep making content like this, so consider making a donation at stillnessinthestorm.com/donate. You can also become a monthly contributor on Subscribestar, where we've got exclusive benefits and cool perks. I'll be producing more videos in the future on exposing falsehoods, how to use critical thinking, and ways that we can work together to defend ourselves and our communities from toxic influences. As a great man once said,